Alright, it is 1,000,000 degrees outside, and I have turned the air conditioning off so it won't make competitive noise, but I may turn it back on if I overheat in here. So we're on to Triad Wars 2, Round 3. We have 3 players still alive. Rest in peace, Piggy Man. In Round 2, Piggy Man was defeated. Brenn has won both his games in rounds 1 and 2. He has not given up a single tie. But we also have Delial and Turdz still in it. Both players, some claim, know how the cards work. I picked Brenn for the best game of round 1, and I liked the Delial game most in round 2. Who will be the pick of round 3? I'm actually not sure what my pick is going to be yet. I guess we'll see as we go. And we've reached the Sweet 16, so we have 3 humans left. We have 13 AIs. One of them is going to be our champion. Will it be a human or will it be an AI? If you win in this round, you make the quarterfinals, you get an icon. Turdz earned one in the last tournament. Can anyone join him earning a second? Can Brenn or Delial make it to an icon, and can he reach his second icon? But more importantly, we have our rule set. I'm going to talk more about this than I usually do. So it's level 3 through 6. All cards are available, but the total level of your hand must equal 22. So if you wanted to have as many level 6s as possible, you could go 6, 6, 4, 3, 3. But you'd have to have 4, 3, 3 as your other 3 cards to add up to 22. You could also say, I don't want to use any level 3s at all. And you could go 4, 4, 4, 5, 5, or you could go 4, 4, 4, 4, 6. You could say, I don't want to use level 5s, and that could get you to the 6, 6, 4, 3, 3 hand. But it could also get you to... no, I guess that's the one that makes sense. The 4, 4, 4, 4, 6 hand, I guess, also avoids level 5. You could say, I don't want to use level 6s, and use a 5, 5, 5, 4, 3, or a 5, 5, 4, 4, 4 hand. So there's lots of choices, and I think my thinking about the rule set looked sort of like this. Are you afraid of the 8s that come on level 6 cards? And so kind of the first strategy that comes to mind, which I'll call Plan A, is use 2 level 6s, possibly with 8 corners, just to get the biggest, most powerful numbers you have available and try to overpower them. This is going to be a 6, 6, 4, 3, 3 build. And the advantage is going to be that the level 3 and 5 to 5 cards are probably not very good at directly dealing with 8s unless they specifically choose ones that do. Because like 7, 6, 3, 2s don't handle 8s very well, and that's the most common thing at level 4. 7, 7 corners on level 5 aren't going to deal that well with 8, 8 corners on level 6. But the disadvantage is if you're running a bunch of level 6s, you're going to have to run a bunch of level 3s as well. So you're going to have a weaker bottom end in exchange. So let's assume that's sort of the strategy you assume your opponent is on. What would you do to counter it? And we reach Plan B. The idea of something that specifically counters 8s to try to oppose the kind of obvious first level strategy. So you might use level 6s of your own, but you might just use level 5s and 4s and lower stuff, but specifically cards with numbers with gaps of 2 so that they can plus wall 8s. And so the advantage of this is, of course, it should give the level 6 cards trouble. Maybe they have no good home, maybe they're not safe. Level 6s have a strong front compared to the lower levels, but usually a weak backside. Like if you want an 8-8 corner, you're probably stuck with like a 4 and a 2 in the back. While a level 5 might have a 6-7 corner, but have a 6-3 in the back. More kind of versatile cards. So if you do stuff to pick this, maybe you leave your opponent with their level 6s not being very useful, and then they're stuck with some pretty weak cards. So hopefully a Plan B strategy would give level 6 cards trouble, but you might be stuck with weaker cards. You're picking stuff with specifically 2 gaps, and those might not be the best cards in general. They're just specifically good at handling 8s. So then we get to Plan C, which is, okay, I don't think people are going to go with the big level 6s, or at least I'm not scared of the big level 6s. They can only use 2 of them. That's not a big percentage of their hand. What I should be trying to do is do the stuff that beats the levels 3, 4s, and 5s that are going to make a majority of my opponent's hand. So specifically, we're going to spam a lot of level 5 cards, use 6, 7, 6, 3 type things that really crush levels 3s, levels 4s, and other level 5s. And the idea is, if you're building a hand to beat 8s, I'm going to build a hand that crushes you. And I think maybe it can handle Plan A as well, though that's really not clear. I don't have a strong intuition here. So the pros is it should crush Plan B hands, and for cons, maybe it's weak to A. Maybe it doesn't run enough stuff to counter level 6s. And then the fourth strategy is the one I'm sure Piggy would have done if he had made it to this round, which is not specifically planned to counter anything specific at all, but find cards that work nicely together and figure there will be ways you can deal with threats as they come. So this was how I thought through the rule set when I was making it, of what I thought the thinking would be. And I was really curious where the players would land on kind of plan A, use the level 6s, plan B, build to counter level 6s, plan C, built to counter level 5s and lower. And we'll see where players end up. And they probably won't end up categorizing super cleanly into these strategies, so this is probably not the clearest articulation of what's going on. But I thought it was interesting, and if you're watching this, I'm curious what you would have gone with. So our first game, I'm again showing these games chronologically in the order they were played, is Brenn versus Joker. And Joker gets first turn. The human player will always be on the right and in blue. The AI player will always be on the left and in red. So the AI goes with a 6/6/4/3/3 hand. It is not the last time we will see Blank and Seal Guardian, the two level 6s combined here. Those are always very powerful cards in level 6s. They have lots of 2 gaps. They have a strong 8/7 top end corner. On the other hand, Brenn is a player who did choose to go for an 8/8 corner, but he chose to diversify, make sure he had one card from each level, so his hand is 6, 5, 4, 3, and then at level 4, because that's the only thing that adds up. He chose Landis, which is an interesting choice. It has a lot of kind of raw power, but doesn't have the gaps, so it requires setup to be effective for pluses and other things. And also, I want to say the most fun part of Brenn's hand is he chose Porker, the 3/5/3/5. Rest in peace, Piggy Man. He chose it in your honor, and he said, win or lose, however long I go, I will use Porker in honor of Piggy Man. So I really liked that. And we'll see how he does. The hand looks like it's built to design 8/1/4/8 and 9 as its intended starter, though sadly for Brenn's hand, if that was indeed the intent, Joker's hand lines up pretty well to capture that. His plus walls in both directions against it. So Joker had first turn and uses their weakest card in 5. And this is a very different starter than we've seen any AIs employ to this point. I've talked a bit about how someone each round gets a tricky AI, and each of the AIs this round are quite different, and it's not obvious to me who gets the tricky AI this round, or the harder AI, but this one certainly has the most kind of complex starter mechanic, willing to go in 5 and aim for more complicated positions than the other AIs are aiming for, though all the games end up being quite complicated, so I don't know if that's true at all. So here, the plan of 8/1/4/8 and 9 isn't really on the cards, and Brenn instead goes for a move that looks quite appealing, 1/6/6/6 and 1. It sets up 2/5/7/6 in both 2 and 4. It is a card that is a little tricky for Joker to take. They only have one way to take it, or I guess they have 2 ways to take it from 2, but it's one of those cards it's a little easier for you to take than it is for them to take. You have one card that now has combos in both the adjoining squares, while they don't have such a card. And I think this is a logical move, but after Joker's move in 8, the position's tricky. I think this is dangerous. The core idea of Joker's move is it doesn't give any safe squares up. Brenn has nothing safe he can put in 2. He has nothing safe he can put in 9. He has nothing safe he can put in 4 or 7. And these, what I call J formations or J setups, I think are really tricky if you can't find obvious safety. And even when you can, as shown by my game against Delial in an earlier video, sometimes you just lose anyway. But I always find it, as the second turn player here, really difficult to figure out where the defensive plan should be. And there's also the problem that one of the big combo plans for Brenn here is 2/5/7/6 and 4 with the plus there, but now there's a same for Joker and Reply in 7. So I think this position is really dangerous, and I really like what Brenn decided to do here, because the core idea is if we don't have safety, we're going to need to get our cards that don't play well out of our hand, and he just goes for that immediately. And he plays Porker in 9. I think there's also arguments for playing it in 2 or even 3 and trying to direct the game a little more upward with his hand more upward itself. But this makes a lot of sense to me, because while it looks intuitively kind of terrible, the opponent can immediately take it and lock it in forever. It's just theirs if they play 7/5/3/2 and 6. It gets the card that makes the least sense for the rest of the game out of his hand. And I think that's a really important strategy in difficult positions, is how can I find a way to find some use for the card that isn't playing well here. And the opponent could also play 7-5-3-2 and 7 here, which looks very dangerous. But they do go for 7-5-3-2 and 6. And Brenn looks a bit for a win, but very comfortably, again, finds a not necessarily intuitive move of, well, we go to the next diagram. There we go, 8-1-4-8 and 3, which can be taken and locked in. But the important part is he has 7-6-4-4 and 4 at the end, not 2-5-7-6. And he survives quite comfortably, I think, from a very dangerous looking, to my eyes, position. And I thought this was a really cool game because Brenn has exemplified such a clear defensive strategy, right? As in fact, we'll see in the next game. You know, Brenn has begun every game except this one with a move in 4, planning to retake it with safety facing outwards from 1 or 7. And that has happened every single game with Brenn we've seen till this one, and will keep being a trend in his game. And this opponent offered him no safety, and he identified, okay, if I'm not given safety, I have to find a way to get rid of the cards that aren't playing well and are never going to offer me safety. And so I thought it was quite an elegant way for a clearly defensive-minded player to handle a position where defense wasn't really an option. So we have a very solid tie in game 1. And then in game 2, Brenn's going to get first turn. He switches up his hand a little bit. He brings in Power Seraph, which was a card every single player identified having interest in. They all thought, how am I going to deal with 8s? And what are lower level cards that can deal with 8s? And every single one of them mentioned Power Seraph, because the 1 and 3s have that 2 gap, the 9 can overpower 8s. And I have always been a hater of rares, so I'm rooting for it to fail. But it was interesting that so many good players thought Power Seraph really fits this rule set. The downside, of course, is that 3 of their cards are not going to be level 6s, and they don't have to use level 6s at all. It could be 4 or 5 of their cards are not level 6s, and it's not likely to play very well against things that don't have 8s on it. So Brenn gets first turn. Unlike last time, his hand isn't as clearly built around an intended starter, but he goes with 3-7, 3-6, and 4. And again, he likes this 4 move. But I think the logic here is kind of compelling, which is that even though he doesn't have a safe recapture in 1 or 7, the only thing with significant power to the left in Joker's hand is blank, the 7-3-5-8. And that, if it for instance went in 2, Brenn would have a plus in 5. And if that went in 8, I guess he wouldn't, but he would have potentially a safe way to recapture it from 9 with 7-4-4-6. So I think there's a real logic to here of, even though he doesn't have safety, his cards make it tough for the opponent to have safety, and if he plays an unsafe card in 1 or 7, he probably can dissuade them from capturing. But the more important part, because I should have gotten to quicker, was the opponent has no safety in 1 or 7 either. The 8 facing out is well dealt with by Porker, rest in peace Piggy, and the 5 facing out can be handled by the 7-4-4-6, which has sort of odd enough numbers for what the other cards are that nothing's going to be able to combo it back. And the AI goes in 8, and here's where we see these AI are doing, I think, fun moves, but I really tried to give them different styles, and here we're seeing one that is very different from any of the ones we've seen before. Typically moves in 8 in these structures, the idea is you get a free square in 7, but then I can play in either 1 or 9 safely. Here, that's not really the case, but it also sets up a plus in 5 that Brenn doesn't have, and that can still be tricky to deal with. So Brenn, I think quite reasonably, takes the safe spot in 7, specifically chooses to hold on to Porker to deal with 8s, because we don't want to give up that safety, right? Though I think Porker was also a reasonable card to choose, but after... Can we go to the next diagram? After 7-3-5-8 and 1, which looks a little weird to me because it uses one of the higher level cards in the hand early, but it is on second turn, so you do want to get the better cards out of your hand eventually. And it also doesn't have a strong out-facing value. But it does show sort of the point of this move in 8, which is Brenn has no move in 5 that captures everything. And the more you look at this position, the trickier it gets. Because Brenn would like to capture in 2. Like, that's obviously what we'd like to do from the Brenn side. But each move there leaves him with kind of poor cards for the rest of the game. The 7-4-4-6 has by far the most directional power in the direction it's going to go, right? So the key problem, better said, is Brenn cannot get Power Seraph out of his hand this turn while doing something he wants to do, right? Like, if you play Power Seraph in 2 or something like that, which I think is actually a surprisingly decent move because it sets up a threat in 5 of Porker in 5. But if you play something like Power Seraph in 2, you're just giving them 1 forever. And there's not a place to get Power Seraph out of the hand, and it's clear at this point it's not doing useful things. It's not going to be the sweeper Brenn needs at the end of the game. And then there's options like Porker in 2, but after the opponent recaptures from 5, they will be up 6-4, and Power Seraph just has no captures in the endgame there. Even though blue has more secure cards in the far left row, it's too hard for Brenn to capture the middle cards, and those are pretty difficult too. So this is just like fundamentally a much tougher position than I think it has any right to be. That move in 8 really putting a lot more pressure than I think most of us would expect it to do. Brenn ends up making the move I think is the most natural, kind of compelling move in the position, which is I can play in 9 safely, I'm going to take safety, I'm not going to mess with your card in 1, I don't see a profitable way to do so. This also directs the game more downwards, so Power Seraph can play a lot better. And your big move in 5, well, I can combo that back. As long as I hold on to Porker, I can combo you back in 2. Now, I think the best move was probably something that gets rid of Porker or gets rid of Power Seraph, because the downside of this move is it does get the best card out of Brenn's hand. And it turns out, after a different move in 5 that can still be comboed, the problem is Joker has the combo back, right? Brenn has the plus in 2, but Joker can combo back in 6. And after some thought, Brenn realized, this is a loss. I'm going to go out in style. Plays Porker in 2, flipping everything, but 7-5-3-2 and 6 flips everything back, and Brenn loses 7-3. So Brenn goes out here in round 3. I really liked seeing his style. I think his first 2 games are so kind of clear, and his hand works nicely together, and he wins the games very comfortably. Here, in the first round, I thought it was neat to see him in a position where he just could not play defensively, and he found a really nice way to get Porker out of his hand and find a clear path to at least a tie. And in this game, again, he was forced into kind of defense isn't going to work, and this time I think he didn't find the way to get the weaker cards out of his hands. And I think that was hurt somewhat by having Power Seraph, which does not give you a level 5 worth of value on this kind of set unless you're facing level 6s it plays well against. And here it wasn't. So I think he sort of had this extra weakness in his hand he had to find a way to get rid of, and he ended up not finding that way. But was really happy to have Brenn. I look forward to seeing him in future tournaments because I liked how he played, and I think he played really well. And this is a tough game and a tough rule set. So we're going to move on to our next competitor. Can anyone survive? And we have Delial versus Race Dular from FF Tactics. So Delial has always really liked 7-6-4-3s, and you can see he chooses those in his hand. He chooses 3 level 5s, a level 3 and a level 4. So Delial decided, I don't want level 6s in my hand. I do not think the 8s are that valuable. I think the 6-4s on level 5s, you'll notice there are a lot of 2 gaps. The 7-5 on the level 4 he chose. You know, all of these things deal with 8s comfortably. I can handle 8s, and I can do it with more dynamic cards that can play off each other nicely. On the other side, we have Race, who also chose to eschew level 6s entirely. And I sort of made this hand for her as a meme hand, in that I thought it was funny to pick 4 Behemoth. As a kid, I said Behemoth, and it's really hard to get out of my head that it's Behemoth. There are a bunch of words I just, the correct pronunciation does not come naturally to me, because for so many years of playing FF, I had only seen it written, and it was Behemoth. Anyway, the Behemoths are really strong cards here, and similar strategy of I don't need level 6s. But unlike Deli, this hand is specifically designed, I'm not actually even scared of level 6s, I'm going to crush other level 5 hands, which makes this a really hard matchup for Delial's hand, because the other person's hand is using the cards that were most used, those 6-7, 6-3s, for laming on level 5. And I think this is just visibly and quickly a difficult situation. The behemoths are very strong. And they start with 2, 4, 7, 7, and 3, and this is a really tough move to meet. Delial does have the plus wall in 6, but the downside of that is he needs to keep one of the weaker cards in his hand to keep that plus wall alive. So if he wants to try to pressure their starter and set things up against it, he's just going to have to hold on to that 6-3-1-6 for a long time. And while 6-6-3-2 type stuff does hold up pretty well, like the level 3s hold up pretty well on level 4, they don't hold up that well when facing level 5s. And this isn't even a 6-6-3-2, it's a 6-6-3-1 designed to counter 8s more, because the 3-1 part can plus wall 8s. But there are no 8s here, so it's a weaker card than a 6-6-3-2, which already wouldn't hold up well, and you kind of don't want to keep holding that kind of card in your hand for too long. Further, Deli can't take it at all from 2. And if you start looking for setups in Deli's hand for how to take it from 2, he doesn't have any move in 5 that sets himself up to be able to take it from 2. Does he have any move in 1? Doesn't look like it. I guess 6-7-3-4 sets it up in 1. 6-7-3-4 in 1 sets up a move in 2. But this is starting to get very dangerous because you're using the card that is most directed towards the course of the game immediately to set up having to hold on to your weakest 2 cards in your hand, which are now the 2 ones you need for pluses and plus walls. And further, it gives the opponent the plus there too. So I think this is just a very, very difficult position. The hands line up poorly for Deli. The starter lines up poorly for Deli. After some thought, he plays a really interesting move in 1, which I think is kind of fitting to Delial's very complex aggressive style, where the opponent can take from 4 and he can't. It also doesn't even set himself up against 1, but it does potentially set himself up to be able to play in 2. And it is hard for the opponent to block 2 because Deli can plus wall back in 6. And so he's just trying to create like little difficulties from a position. And he said at some point around here, like, I hope I didn't just automatically lose with this move, because the position is really hard, and I haven't gone super in depth, but it just gets harder the more you look at it. The opponent has a lot of moves that look scary. Most things in 7, 8, and 9 are kind of scary. They could block 6 and just lock in their card in 3, and they'd have to figure out the right card to do so, but like 6-3, 6-7 there is safe and locks in the card in 3 pretty well, is safe in 6. That looks really terrifying. It doesn't even surrender safety to Deli in 9, so that looks very scary. But it would give Deli a safe square in 2, and Deli's just trying to find some squares that his cards can have value. Instead, the opponent, I think quite reasonably, plays 7-6-3-2 and 7, getting one of the weaker cards out of their hands, setting up a plus in 4. They have last turn, so that plus is going to matter more than the fact that Deli also has a plus there. A card Deli has trouble taking because the only way he can take from 8 gets plus walled back whenever the opponent wants. Again, really hard position. And, if Deli plays in 2, they can play in 4 or 6. If Deli plays in 4, they can play in 2 or 8. If Deli starts trying to set up stuff in 5 or 9, it just looks so much like the opponent's going to have more combos at the end. They're still threatening to block 6 anytime they want to and lock in that card in 3. So, again, I think Deli makes an interesting choice with 6, 7, 3, 4, and 4. Just trying to find safety wherever he can. And he still has this key plus wall in 6, right? He's still discouraging the opponent from playing in 2. And by virtue of that, he wants to play in 4 so that they can't make the kind of natural, obvious, I'm going to take in 2 and play something safe. So he is just trying to use the little tools he has. But then the opponent plays 6-3, 6-7, and 6. And again, this is just horrifying because that card's safe. The card in 3 is safe. All of Delial's cards are in danger, right? The 3-6-2-6 can take either of Delial's cards on the board. It's a very hard position. And the 3-6-2-6 kind of dominates the bottom row at the end. Like, if Delial, for instance, plays something like 4-3-7-6 and 2. I haven't looked at this game for a bit, so I'm now going to lose lines. But Actually, there the opponent probably wins with yeah, the opponent there wins with 3-6, 2-6, and 9, because the behemoth just dominates everything left in Deli's hand after that. So Deli can't even block 2, even though there's safety there. This is a real nightmare of a position. Deli sends a message saying, "I think I lost to the AI." And then a few seconds later, wait, ... And then a minute after that, 4-6, 4-7, and 9 comes in. And I believe you'll find Deli has found the only tie in the position. And boy, is it a mess. But safety sometimes comes through. He found one safe place to put a card, and that proves to be enough to hold. The AI goes in 2. Deli recaptures, and he's just about snuck his way to a tie. But ooh, terrifying game. So much trouble from the start. There are probably better moves than the move in 1, and maybe you can find it, but just a very hard position to defend, where I think Delial found a very narrow path to hold this one. And we move on to game 2. Now, Delial here switched up his hand a bunch. He brings in Power Seraph, which is a card we've already seen, and as I've said, I do not think this card is good on this rule set, but we'll see how it does in Delial's hands. Another thing is he brings in a 7-6-2-4. These cards didn't see as much use as 7-6-2-3 type cards, but here, if you think there are going to be any 8s in their hand, maybe the 2 gap is worth something, though, of course, here, the opponent has no gaps in their hand. But the 7-4 part might do a better job of dealing with opposing 7s. The other interesting thing here was, I know when playing tournaments, there were lots of times where you tie a game and you think, my opponent's hand was a lot better than mine. Should I just take cards from it and copy their idea because they clearly had a better sense of it than I did? And there were very much players who just would not do that, and there were other players who would immediately jump on to the best thing they saw. And I had no idea which one Deli was, and I'm not sure actually this shows it, but Delial clearly liked the idea of the behemoth twins, as he called them, and that the imp played nicely with them. Though he wasn't taking the imp because the opponent had used it. He was specifically looking for ways to make a good hand with Power Seraph. And he wanted to be able to use those sideways 3s to plus other things. So for instance, if 7-6-2-4 is in 7 and Power Seraph is in 5, that sets up the imp, Arast, to have pluses in both 4 and in 8. So a lot of the cards he was picking here, and also it has the 3 and the 2, which can plus wall the 9 if Power Seraph's 9 is facing down from 5. So he ended up picking the same cards here, and he clearly had no inhibition about choosing cards the opponent was using. But it was interesting because he picked them for very different reasons than the opponent was choosing them for, and it was specifically trying to make a hand built around Power Seraph work. So Delia's first turn, and he was clearly intending to go Power Seraph in 5, but he mentioned just did not like the look of it at all. And I think one particular problem is by giving up having a 7 facing down, if they put one of the behemoths in 4 or 6, he's just not going to be able to handle it from above. That might have been one of the problems, I'm really not sure. But he ended up getting dissuaded from that, and then he started considering Power Seraph in other squares, and ended up playing the Power Seraph in 3, also considered Power Seraph in 6, I think. In general, I like the idea of getting Power Seraph out of your hand, right? I think it is not a card that plays well here. He was specifically intending to use it as a setup card, but I think even if you don't like its placement in 5, when you have a card you're building setups around, you often really do need to get it out of the hand quickly, because on its own it's often quite weak. And something kind of interesting happened here, which is I mentioned after the AI made its move, 6-3, 6-7, and 9, which you'll notice again, totally safe. Deli's hand just cannot deal with this. The downside of using Power Seraph is it did give up the ability to take upward 6s. So again, this is going to be just a horrible position for Delial. But I mentioned that the other move the AI considered was 6-7, 6-3, the other of the Behemoth twins, in 7. And Deli misheard me and thought the other move, and I didn't mention this to him, so I'm hoping he hears this video and is amused by this, because we'll come back to this in a bit, is amused because he heard that the other move it had been considering was 6-3, 6-7, and 7. Not 6-7, 6-3, which is safe, but 6-3, 6-7, and he started thinking about that move and thought, that's sort of interesting, because I don't actually think... I think that's a pretty good move, and we'll get back to that. But I think it's funny that he misheard me, and that will later influence something he thinks about. So again, another just nightmare of a position for Delial. He did think the opponent should have played in 7 rather than 9, because at least this way he gets some safety for himself. But now the AI has free choice of just lots of different L formations. They can play in 2, they can play in 8. But there's some redemption to Delial's position. The cards in 2 allow themselves to be comboed. The 6-7-6-3 Behemoth can be comboed from 5. The 3-6-2-6 Imp can be plus walled from 1. The 7-6-3-2 can't be taken with any rule, but is pretty vulnerable to combos down the road, and I think Deli's position there is doing okay. The 2-4-7-7 is comboed immediately by the Imp in 1. So the opponent doesn't really have a natural way to play in 2. Probably the likely best is 7-6-3-2 and 2. They ended up going for 8 instead, and I think they found the best move to play in 8, and I think a real theme of these games has been the best moves have been the moves that get the weakest cards out of your hand. And what is the weakest card in Race's hand? So maybe surprisingly it's 2-4-7-7, but it just doesn't play well to the directionality of the game. There's lots of stuff that can play off it if it's played later. It's often going to be dominated in the end game by things like the Imp, Erast, the 3-6-2-6. And this position suddenly becomes, again, just really, really difficult for Delial. And the core problem is that something is going to land in 2 at some point. And Delial has no good way to block that 2 square, because just like everything that Race could put in 2, Delial could combo back. Everything Deli puts in 2 is very vulnerable to combos as well. And specifically, the one card that wasn't, 7-6-2-4, now is, due to the card newly placed in 8. So anything in kind of 2 is kind of terrible. Anything in 1 gives up 2 and 3. And so you're sort of left with ideas in 4, 5, and 9. But the moves in 5 are so comfortably met by either something in 2 or 7-6-3-2 Behemoth in 7. It's a bit hard to refer to the cards this game because they're all named Behemoth. There are 6 total cards between the 2 hands named Behemoth. And so we're left with a tough situation. And then something weird happened, which is Delial said 7-6-2-4 and 4. And when I sent him back the picture of the position, he had meant to say 7. Now, what we should have done, what any reasonable pair of people would have done, is said, okay, your move is 7-6-2-4 and 7. But we went down rabbit holes that I do not understand how we didn't get out of sooner, and it took us like a half hour to agree that, maybe even more than that. And I know when people say, like, this took a half hour, what they mean is it took 5 minutes and those were interminable. No, this actually took like a half hour before we figured that, like, yeah, Delial should play the move he meant to play, not this not very good move in 4. But the move in 4 is pretty complicated. And part of the reason we took so long to get back to what we should actually have done from the start is that the move in 4 was interesting, and that Delial had an interesting idea for a move in 1, and we got very distracted. But talked with all the other players. Everyone's okay with kind of misclicks not being punished, because that's basically what happened. And of course on TTA, if you misclicked in a tournament and it was losing, you were going to lose. But here, that kind of sucks, so it's nice to do something different. But 7-6-2-4 and 4, the move he kind of accidentally said, sets up this same in 5 that can force the opponent to have to block 5. But it turns out they can block 5 with 6-7-6-3, and Deli would have been losing after that. But instead, he plays 7-6-2-4 and 7, which I think is the only tie. And is a hard tie to find, because it can both be taken, and it's not obvious Deli has a great reply, or they can take something in 2 still, and it's not obvious Deli can play in 5, because everything he could play in 5 is potentially is just immediately comboed by one of the behemoths in the opponent's hand, or the imp. So again, this looks terrible, but I think Deli here finds the only way to a tie. Once again, just really narrow paths to survival here. So if the opponent plays behemoth 6-7-6-3 and 4, then Delial, I think, can tie with 3-6-2-6 and 5. And even though that doesn't flip the card in 8, the 6-7-6-3 at the end will take just enough. The opponent has no down power left, and will take just enough to manage the tie. The AI instead goes for 6-7-6-3 and 2, and again, we gotta be careful. but Delial can find blocking 5, still down 6-4, but the 6-7, 6-3 is so strong at the end that this is enough to manage the tie. And oh my god, he survives again with the misclick issue, but we'll pretend that never happened. And we move on to game 3, but these were exhausting games. Delial was also progressively getting drunker throughout the games, though perhaps that made him play better, very unclear. And we're on to game 3, and Race gets first turn again. Deli sticks with his hand, even though it was completely dominated last game. And Race goes for this corner starter. And, well, at least Delial can take it this time. You know, he can take it both ways. That looks comfortable. I'm not sure what I would play with for Delial here, because there is a real disadvantage when you have a lot of the same cards that your hands are built to recapture themselves, and so there's just more of the cards that they're built to recapture, and suddenly whoever has last turn often just has a huge advantage in these mirror hands. And in the last game, that wasn't the case. Delial had final turn, but he had these really big weaknesses of having like Power Seraph in his hand that he had to find a way to get rid of, and that sort of gave up that advantage. But here, Delial still has the weakness of having Power Seraph in his hand, which I really think was not a good card for this rule set. And Race does not have that weakness, and Race has last turn, and I think this is once again just a terrible situation for Delial, who finds something interesting to do, which is get Power Seraph out of his hand as quickly as possible. Now, my instinct would be to chuck it somewhere that doesn't start blocking in the opponent's cards for them, somewhere like 7, or something like that. Just get it out of my hand and play from there. I can retake your starter, so I'm not immediately worried about that. I will put it somewhere in the distance, and we'll go from there. But Deli said something here about sort of how he plays to get certain cards out of the opponent's hand. And this move does indeed draw a powerful card out of the opponent's hand, which of course they can take back both ways with Arast. And of course, both players have Arast, the 3/6/2/6, which can take back in both 1 and 5, but it is more helpful for first turn to have that. But Deli did successfully draw one very powerful card out of the opponent's hand, though at the same time, if the game is directed upright, that behemoth is not as strong as it would normally be. And here, after some thought, he considered blocking 5, just surrendering more squares to the opponent, but trying to continue to draw powerful cards out of the opponent's hand, which is a very curious strategy, and one of those, we'll see how that works out for him type things. But he ends up playing just this idea of the 6-3, 6-7 in my hand doesn't have much play, and I really liked that idea. I thought the AI had last turn, playing 6-3, 6-7, and 7. And for the record, the AI never considered that move. It had considered 6-7, 6-3, and 7, and decided to play 6-3, 6-7, and 9 instead last game on the second move. But Delial, having misheard that, was inspired to make this very odd move, but one that like starts making sense as soon as you look at it. It's very hard for the opponent to take or deal with. And it doesn't create free squares for the opponent to set anything up or just have safety for their own cards, right? It blocks them having potential safety in 1. It blocks them having potential, it's not conceding safety in 1 or 9. It's not giving an obvious move. It is a move the other person's hand does not deal with easily. So I thought it was really cool that he was inspired by a move that never existed. And played what I think is a really interesting move in a tough situation. But the AI, once again, brings a lot of pressure with 7, 6, 3, 2, and 8. And the point is, Arast is now super deadly in both 5 and 9, and 6, 7, 6, 3 will dominate 1 and 4. And once again, this looks like an absolute nightmare for Delial, because even though he has all the same combo squares, he doesn't have last turn. So whichever, if he takes 5 or 9, they can play Arast in the other of 5 or 9. If he takes 1 or 4, they can play Behemoth in the other of 1 or 4, and then Arast will dominate in 5 and 9. And this kind of has the appearance of looking just hopelessly lost. And Deli thinks for a bit and goes, I think I have a tie. And he was wrong. Because actually, oops. Oh no, I'm so sorry I spoiled things maybe. Hopefully you didn't see the last 5 seconds. But as I was about to spoil things with my voice anyway, this move is miraculously not a tie. It's actually a win for Deli. Just completely out of the blue. Because the key is, That 6/7, 6/3, and 1 or 4, that's supposed to go in 1 or 4, Deli now has this combo out of nowhere with his own behemoth in 5, and importantly, it never flips the card in 8, so stuff doesn't get comboed back. So behemoth in 4 now loses to behemoth in 5, even though Arasta 9 looks like it combos everything. The card in 8 never got flipped, and it only takes Power Seraph. And the AI goes for it. Deli combos, and Deli wins 6-4 and advances to the quarterfinals. What a nightmare of a set. He said after the game that he had not played this much defense in years, just every game on the back foot. I do think the Behemoth hand is actually like pretty close to optimal for the rule set. I thought it was just remarkably powerful. And I think the 6/7, 6/3s deal pretty well with, level 6s as well. Obviously, they're not what you choose in a level 6 game, but I think given that you can play a bunch of them while a hand that chooses level 6s can only play 1 or 2, I kind of think this Behemoth hand is about as good as it's going to get. And after just nightmare defenses game after game, Delial found a way to sneak out a win, really out of the blue. Very strange match. Hope it was exciting for viewers. I was on the edge of my seat for it. Very weird game. Whew. So now we get Turdz, the final game of the games of the round that were played. Typo on the left. It's supposed to be Triad Wars 2, round 3, game 1. But WeGraph gets first turn. Turdz, who said he had a lot of trouble picking a hand for this. He went back and forth. He, considered Power Seraph like everyone else did. He considered using no level 6s, but in the end he decided, Blank and Seal Guardian are this really strong pair, and the rest of the hand sort of naturally fits around them. 4/6, 4/6 can recapture both of those in their natural corners, and 6/3, 6/3 can recapture them the other way. 7/5, 3/1 has a lot of 2 gaps to deal with 8s, and covers a corner that the hand doesn't already have a card for. So the whole hand makes sense. I think if you're going to use level 6s, this looks like a very reasonable, consistent hand to go. I do think optimal is not to use level 6s. I do think the 6/7, 6/3 hands are better than this. On the other side, and you may or may not agree. That doesn't mean I am correct or anything. That's just what I believe about the rule set. On the other side, we have WeGraph, who's using one level 6, a level 5, a level 4, a level 3, and another level 4. Kind of just the most powerful cards at each level. And then the last level 4 is something specifically designed to counter 8s. Ooh, I totally lost the thread I was going to talk about at the start, which is how different players' hands fit into the strategies I outlined. Which really may suggest that those strategies weren't good. But I do think the best hand we've seen, the Behemoth hand, was definitely that C plan. Definitely that I'm not worried about level 6s, and I'm just going to be the best hand I can be at level 5. And I think that hand was great and suggests that plan C was the way to go. Delial also ended up doing some sort of plan C, though a little more focused on being able to handle 8s, so something kind of between B and C. Turdz here did something between A and B. So quite a different hand where he's using level 6s, as plan A is use the most powerful things, but he's also very specifically making sure he has tons of 2 gaps in his hand, not just to recapture his own stuff, but to deal with potential level 6s in the opponent's hand. So I think where Delial and his opponent were more plan C, maybe a little plan B, and where I think Brenn used an 8/8 corner. I think Brenn was in the A-B sphere. Turdz, I think, is also in that kind of A-B sphere of I'm going to use level 6s and I'm going to make sure to counter level 6s. While Delial and his opponent were much more on the level 6s are not what I want to be doing. I want to be using strong level 5s. But I think if you're going to be using level 6s, I do quite like Turdz' hand here. WeGraph his first turn, and he starts with 3/7, 6/3, and 3, a move he can retake, but not that easily. Male Oracle, the 3/6/2/2, would fit a little better as a 2/6, 6/3, but, still, looks like a reasonable corner starter. I'm always hesitant to use the best cards in my hand early, so I probably would have found a way to... honestly, I love weak corners. I would have played like 3/6/2/2 and 3/6/6/2 and like 9 or something, and just assumed I could make it work later. But this is a reasonable move. And I like Turdz' reply, because I think so much of what we've seen in these games is the difference between the best moves and weaker moves is figuring out not what you're doing on the board, but which cards you just have to get out of your hand for later. And I think that's something Brenn did really well in his first game, but not as well in his second. I think that's something Delial found really strange ways to do throughout his, but kind of masterfully somehow pulled that off. And I think here, Turdz really keeps an eye to which cards do I need in my hand and which don't I. And the 4/6/4/6 is one. It's designed to recapture 8s that aren't in the opponent's hand, and it's designed to play well with Turdz' level 6s, but it's a card, if you don't need it in your hand, you want to get it out of your hand. And it also sets up 6/3/6/3 to have recaptures both ways on the opponent's starter. The opponent follows a similar idea of this is not the card that plays best in my hand, though it's a bit better for, what's the name of the AI he's playing? Weegraph. For Weegraph to hold on to this one, because it does play better against Turdz' hand than Turdz' 4/6/4/6 played against Weegraph's hand. But we have one of those 3-point setups, and these can be very complicated because there's the instinct to go in either 5 or 7, kind of aiming for some kind of X. But also you can, of course, block 2 or 4, and 2 or 6, and occasionally 4 or 8 work out well. And I think Turdz chose nicely here, which is, while it looks like Weegraph's hand is nicely pointed to the right, they actually don't have many captures there with all those 6s facing left. So the only way for them to capture anything in 2 or 8, the natural squares to play in, is to get the best card out of their hand. And I think this is a really nice move, again, playing against the best cards in the opponent's hand. And it plays the board well, too. You know, it captures stuff that is difficult for the opponent to recapture. They can recapture, but they can't do it comfortably. And a move like 8/7/5/3 in 2, I think Turdz just recaptures in 5 and is just winning after that with something like blank in 5, 7/3/5/8 and 5. I think that just wins. I think the remaining cards are not angled well towards the game. They're a level 3 and a level 4. He's left the opponent with the weakest cards in their hand, and he has dissuaded them from the obvious move. And it's an interesting position. If you can find a tie for red, I think there are 2 moves that tie, and both of them understand that I need to keep the 8/7/5/3 in my hand, and I need to direct the game such that it is a useful card. The AI ends up playing 8/7/5/3 and 8, which is a better move than 2, but still tricky. And here we reached, I think, a difficult position because there are a bunch of moves that look like they're winning, and not all of them do. So one thing Turdz could do is just block 2, lock in the card in 3. This looks very solid. Again, the opponent's remaining cards are not well organized for the finish. That looks very reasonable. They could even do it with safety. They could even do 5/8/7/3 and 2 and have the 7 facing down be completely safe. But they also have a really tempting move in 7 with 7/5/3/1 because that's totally safe. It grabs the card in 8, which will also be safe. And both these moves look just completely winning, and one of them isn't. Luckily, Turdz did the calculation and chose the right one, but I did want to pause here because if you pick the wrong one, the way it doesn't work is pretty neat. So Turdz ended up going in 2, actually not with the card I said, but the move in 7 doesn't work because 7/5/3/1 and 7 is met by 6/3/2/7 and 5, not capturing anything, but setting up pluses and sames everywhere, and it's just enough to tie, and it's a really neat move. And I think this is the kind of move that's so easy to miss when you have this kind of like straightforwardly winning multiple ways position, and there's a move that just obviously locks in more cards and you're way ahead, and it's so easy to make that move. And like, how could 7 not be good? 7 is safe, 8 will be safe, 3 is safe, their cards suck. Like, it's just the most trivially winning looking move, and I think it would be very easy to make a tying move like that, and Turdz cleverly avoids it, goes in 2, and sees out a nice win, and Turdz advances to the quarterfinals. I sort of felt weird about the order of this video, because Brenn has this difficult match where the opponent ends up defeating him. Delial has this just absolute nightmare of a match where I have no idea how he snuck out a win because he looked completely destroyed every single game. And then Turd's game, he just sort of, plays good moves and wins. But I think Turd's played really good moves. I think his move in 1 was really on point. I think the move in 6 was excellent, put a ton of pressure on the opponent, and they did not find a way to handle it. And I think Turd's also, kind of his pressuring style, handled this specific AI really well. and I think it probably was the weakest AI of the three, but not by much. And he beat it really cleanly, and it's a really nice win. And I'm sort of torn on who to give the game of the round to, because I think Delial's games were such a mess, but also brilliant defenses when it came down to it. And I think Turd's game is such a nice, elegant, clean win. I'm going to give it to Turdz, because I haven't given him a game of the round yet. Very fair judging. But both of them, I think, played really well, and I'm excited to see them in the next round. They will be going on to the quarterfinals. Here is our quarterfinals rule set. It's level 8 and 9. You must use at least 2 level 8s. You can use a maximum of 1 card that's an A9, and no rares are allowed. I didn't want to deal with AA corners, because I think that messes with what people can do. And that's it. So if both Delial and Turdz win in the quarterfinals, they will meet in the semifinals. They were on the same side of the bracket. Piggyman and Brenn were on the other side of the bracket. So we have 2 humans left. We're down from 4 to 3 to 2. We have 2 left. If they can both survive this round, then they will play each other, and in that case, we will have a human in the finals. But we'll see if they can get there, because these games are tough. Delial could have gone out so easily here. And I'm really excited to see what happens. If we do get both of them in the semifinals, then I think we're going to find a way to all be together at the same time. Because these games have been, I send people moves and they reply when they get to it, which potentially gives them a lot of time to think. Now, most of the time I've been there at the same time and they've just sent me moves and it's been at a reasonable speed, but a lot of these moves have taken longer than the standard tournament time controls, and it would be cool to play, if we do get 2 humans against each other, to find a time where we're all together and we can play it like it's a tournament game and see what happens. But this is getting ahead of ourselves. It would be very easy for neither of them to make it. I think this was a fascinating round. If you watching this spotted moves they should have made, or my analysis was bonkers at some point and you can point out better lines, definitely tell me. I'm curious to see all variations. I'm also really curious to know what would people do. Like, what would your hand be for this kind of rule set? Because I tried to make a rule set where picking what levels you wanted was really tricky, especially because the top level offers access to a number the lower levels don't. Level 6s give you access to 8s, the lower levels don't have them. And how much is the cards you choose defined by, do I want to use 8s myself? Do I need to counter opponents using 8s? I'm probably going to use this rule set or something very similar in a future tournament. Is the behemoth strategy, is 6-7, 6-3s and not using level 6s at all the way to go? Do you think, did I convince you that that was the best path? Or do you think another one's better? Very curious, and I'm excited for the quarterfinals. I think we have 2 great players left, and they're playing really well and playing really differently too. So cheers.